Obsession's art director Sally Joy works on a film that makes nearly 400 million worldwide. She gets paid $6,741. Ranveer Singh reportedly turns down a 60 crore upfront salary for Dhurandhar, reported to walking away with around 300 crores in backend profit share. Similar industry, same business, completely different outcome. And once you look at contracts, financing structures, and how films actually get made, you realize something uncomfortable. This isn't really a story about creativity. It is a story about timing. When you enter a film, what risk you take, and whether your presence reduces uncertainty for someone else putting money in. In other words, leverage. This is Who Decides Episode 4, where we decode who decides who gets a share of a film's success. I used to think if a film succeeds, at least the people who built it should share in that success. Seems obvious, seems fair, but that's not how the system works. In fact, by the time audiences buy their first ticket, the biggest financial decisions have already been made. Long before release, long before reviews, long before anyone knows whether the film will flop or become the biggest surprise hit of the year. And in most cases, long before shooting even begins. Which means Sally Choi's $6,741 and Ranveer Singh's Backend deal worth crores were never really decided by the box office. They were decided much earlier. The question is how? And more importantly, who gets to be in that room of decision making? Every film budget has an invisible line, above the line and below the line. Most people think this separates creative jobs from technical jobs. Rather, it separates something far more important, the people whose contracts are tied to the film's long-term financial upside from the people hired to deliver a defined piece of work. Above the line generally includes directors, producers, writers, and principal cast. Below the line includes production designers, costume designers, cinematographers, VFX, and most of the crew. The difference is not based on skills or importance. It's simply contract structure. That one accounting line quietly determines who can negotiate back-end participation, profit shares, residuals, or phased payments, and who is typically paid a fixed fee. Let's understand filmmaking in its simplest form. Studios controlled everything. Actors were under long-term contracts, crews were organized into departments. Films were built like products, and the core problem wasn't creativity. It was uncertainty. Will the film get made? Will it sell? Will anyone finance it? That uncertainty shaped everything. Two ideas quietly emerged: financial risk appetite and leverage. Risk appetite is how much uncertainty someone is willing to absorb before a film even exists. Leverage is what your name does to a financing conversation. Because when a recognizable actor or director joins a film, they don't just add value, they reduce perceived risk. They make financing easier. That's why stars are expensive. Not because audiences like them, but because they change probability before a single frame is shot. That is leverage. And while writers and producers often carry the project from ideation to completion, they also sit closest to the uncertainty of whether the film will exist at all. That risk sits at the foundation of the system. When Sally joined the project, there was no studio, no distributor, no guaranteed release, just a small indie film financed for roughly $750,000. A 20-day shoot. At that point, the question was not how big will this become? It was, will this ever even get bought? That's how most indie films exist. They first get made, then they enter the festivals, and then they hope. Even a TIFF premiere does not guarantee distribution. Many films get applauded and disappear, but Obsession did not. It premiered at TIFF, triggered a bidding war, and Focus Features reportedly acquired it for around $15 million. That's where everything changes. Except Sally is no longer in the system. Her contract covered pre-production and principal photography, not development. Not financing, not distribution, not marketing. Her work helped build the film, but the financial upside was attached to a phase she was never contracted into. Technically, yes, Practically almost never. And in this case, there's an even more important layer. When she was first contracted for the project, she wasn't walking in with leverage. She was still in the early phases of her career, looking to build her portfolio. Even if she had already worked on a few mid-scale projects, three structural constraints would still define the outcome: leverage, cash flow, risk appetite. Most below-the-line crew cannot afford to bet months of income on a film that statistically may never even succeed. They need certainty, paychecks, predictability. Meanwhile, producers and financiers enter the system differently. They accept uncertainty upfront, sometimes years of development risk before a single frame is even shot. And in return, they are compensated with upside. Deferred compensation exists to bridge that gap. But it only really matters if the film succeeds. And most films do not. So the system defaults to a simple rule: certainty for execution and upside for risk. A high-profile actor attached to a film changes financing behavior instantly. Not because of acting, because of risk reduction. Studios see pre-sold value, distribution confidence, audience pull, lower uncertainty. So when someone like Ranveer Singh negotiates Backend, it is not gamble. It's structured leverage built over years through visibility, credibility, and commercial pull. He can afford uncertainty because the system already trusts his presence. Filmmaking has changed. Audiences don't just follow actors anymore. They follow worlds: visual language, costume identity, cinematography. Think franchises like Star Wars or Minions. Entire visual ecosystem that people recognize instantly. A film today is often defined as much by its aesthetic architects as by its cast. So the question becomes, has filmmaking evolved faster than the contracts that govern it? Because influence is now distributed, but compensation largely is not. Because film money does not just flow like salary. It flows like a waterfall. Investors get paid first, then producers, then back-end participants. Every additional participant dilutes someone else's share, and every person in that chain is already absorbing risk somewhere. Producers spend years on films that never get made. Financiers fund projects that never recoup. Distributors acquire films that underperform. So Backend is not free. It is the redistribution of limited upside across tagged uncertainty. And in reality, the math is harsh. Out of 10 films, maybe one succeeds in a meaningful way. The other 9 don't just underperform, they often fail to recover costs at all. And those losses do not disappear. They sit with the people who bag the risk upfront. That's why not everyone can simply participate in the upside, and also why the system resists simplification. I don't think Sally Choi's story proves that the system is broken. I think it reveals what it was built to reward. Not effort, not contribution, not even importance in the hindsight. It rewards something earlier: the ability to reduce uncertainty before a film even exists. That's leverage, combined with the willingness and financial ability to take risks when there may be no payoffs at all. But here's the uncomfortable question. The above the line and below the line system was designed nearly a century ago. And since then, filmmaking has changed dramatically. The people shaping films have changed. The way the audiences perceive value has changed. But the contracts haven't fully caught up. So maybe the question is not whether the system made sense. It did. The question is whether it still reflects how films are actually made today. And if it does not, what does a fairer version look like? A fresher actor is usually offered a low upfront fee, often with little or no backend. That changes only when they build enough recognition, when their presence itself starts to carry financial weight, when they can influence financing conversations, audience expectations, and distribution confidence. That shift is not about talent alone. It's about perceived reliability in a system built on uncertainty. And if that's true, as a production designer or a DOP or a sound designer, if you become widely recognized, not just within the industry, but with enough cultural fluency that your name itself signals value, and if you are willing to take on risk in the right projects, then maybe, just maybe, you too can begin to leverage personal brand in the same way. Not as an exception, but as an expansion of what above the line could eventually mean. Because the system does not reward titles, it rewards leverage.